Metabolism. Metabolism is something that's very important in how the body functions. And therefore, it's also very important in nutrition because it's how we fuel our body to control and help metabolism. And that's what we'll figure out in this video. Metabolism. What really is it? I'm willing to bet you've heard the term metabolism as in someone has a fast metabolism or they have a slow metabolism. But what really is metabolism? Metabolism is going to be the sum of all chemical reactions that are needed to support cell function in your body. That means these are chemical reactions that build things, chemical reactions that destroy things. But it's the sum of all of these chemical reactions that are powering your body. Now we can break this down into two main areas, catabolism and anabolism. In the case of catabolism, it's the breakdown of molecules. This is releasing energy. In the case of anabolism, that is going to be the building. Now you're using energy to build. But both catabolism and anabolism, they both are part of your metabolic pathways. So when we look at the energy side of things, we know that energy comes from the sun, comes from plants, then animals. It's just constantly flowing. We have to have a constant input of that energy, hence why we eat, because our cells are always using it for the different processes in our body. So we're making ATP, adenosine triphosphate. That's what powers the machinery in our bodies. We don't eat ATP, we ingest other forms of energy, glucose and proteins and lipids. Now, hopefully we're using primarily glucose as our energy source, but the other ones could be used as well. The interesting thing is though, as we're acquiring glucose, so we're bringing glucose into our bodies, we are actually spending energy to get that glucose. We then break that glucose down to release energy. Kind of an interesting way to think about it. Because you have to eat to gain glucose, gain energy. But when you're eating, you're using energy. You're chewing, physically using the energy from the muscles. The rest of the GI tract, you have enzymes, you have absorption going on. All this uses energy as well. So you actually have to invest energy to be able to gain energy by eating. Now, as we go through and power all these different processes with ATP, a lot of these different processes are also using enzymes, I just mentioned. Enzymes are going to help to lower the activation energy. Basically make it feasible for us to be able to do these processes in our body temperature. Because we can't just raise our body temperatures up, we have to work at the temperature we're at. So these enzymes, again, need energy to make them, but these enzymes will help reduce how much energy is needed to go into the reactions for them to occur. So sometimes you have the original substrate, so the original, whatever the product is there, that piece of information. That molecule, that substrate, might need to go through one enzymatic reaction to go to an intermediary, then another enzymatic reaction for a second intermediary, and maybe another enzymatic for a third intermediary, and keep on going until you finally reach the final product. One example of this is glycolysis. Glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose. It doesn't just go from glucose to product. There are steps in between. And this can help us by using multiple enzymes to facilitate this process. So these enzymes will help reduce how much energy we have to invest into the process that's occurring. But now, all of this energy that you're using in these processes, it's giving a constant feedback because you don't want to keep using energy to break down glucose when you have plenty of energy already set to go. So these processes, doesn't matter if it's catabolic or anabolic, these processes have feedback mechanisms. So when your cell goes into a positive energy state, you've got enough, you're good for now. Your body will shift gears. Instead of trying to store more energy and create more through glycolysis, it might shift more into a, hey, let's use this energy to build structures. Or let's use this energy and put it into storage units. So your body constantly has this feedback watching what it's doing, trying to minimize any excess waste or excess processes. Because you don't want to have the same process running over and over using energy when it's not needed. So your body's watching how this works. But as it's watching from head to foot. The entire digestive system is constantly being monitored for how you're digesting all of your nutrients, digesting all of your food. So let's start with the catabolic processes in the mouth. When you eat, you're chewing your food. Well, the catabolic process here is salivary amylase. It's an enzyme that's going to help break down starches until they're smaller building blocks. You also physically chew it, so you break down things that way. But then we continue on down to the stomach. In the stomach, you're going to have the enzyme pepsin, helping to break down proteins and amino acids. You have hydrochloric acid, helping to break down the rest of the food products, at least start the process. Get down to the small intestines. Then you're down breaking down proteins. You're breaking down lipids and carbohydrates. So all of them are being broken down in the small intestines. Proteins go to amino acids. Carbohydrates go to monosaccharides. And your lipids, your triglycerides, they're heading down to their fatty acid chains. The goal is break all these components down, releasing energy for the future use. But now those components that are broken down in the small intestines, we're down to amino acids, monosaccharides, and your fatty acids. They're going to be absorbed into the bloodstream. Well, a little asterisk for a second. The fatty acids can make it into the bloodstream, but typically the fatty acids, because they're lipids and water, they don't really mix, oil, water. So what happens is the fatty acids are actually encased, kind of built into a sphere, and then sent into your lymphatic system. They go through the lymphatic system, eventually do end up in the bloodstream, but they hitch that ride first before going to the bloodstream. So we're taking all these nutrients that you've ingested, broken down to release energy, and sent into your bloodstream. The nutrients will be pulled out of the bloodstream by the cells that need them. Now, when I say the cells that need them, this could be need for metabolic processes, things like catabolic or anabolic, doesn't matter either one. You could be saying, I need to make energy. So, catabolic process like glycolysis. Or it might be more of an anabolic process of building. Now you're going through gluconeogenesis. You're now building up instead of tearing down. So it really depends on what the cell needs as far as what is going to be pulled out of the blood flow. But you can also do other things along the lines of catabolic and anabolic processes for proteins, catabolic and anabolic processes for triglycerides, for glycogen and glucose. It all depends on what you're doing. What do you need to build, or what do you need to store, or what cell machinery needs to be built as well. That's also a process. So this whole process of absorbing the nutrients and then pulling out of the blood is all dependent on each individual cell's need. What do they need to do? They pull them out and perform that function. So let's dive a little more into catabolism and anabolism. Now, we already know catabolism or catabolic processes are breaking down. It's basically taking the cell's functions, looking at what's needed, and that's what's controlling what's happening. So if the cell has a high energy state, it can still go through catabolism, but now it's going to say, you know what? Maybe I don't want to break down as much. Maybe I'll look at more trying to pause that, slow that, and do more building. Or if it's in a low energy stage, it says, you know what? Full steam ahead, let's go through all the catabolic processes. We need to go glucose to ATP, adenosine triphosphate. We need more energy. So it's all based on what is happening in the cell. Whether you slow it down so it's just a trickle of the function, or you ramp it up and it's going full force. Now, in catabolism, or the catabolic process, there's really three main phases or three main steps, let's say. It depends on what molecule you're working with. If we're looking at glycolysis, so glucose, we're going to be in the cytosol, so in the cell, but not inside of any organs. So not really in any organelles there. In glycolysis, you're going to take that glucose molecule. You'll then go through the process, which, as we're looking at, is kind of complex. Thankfully, we don't need to know every step, but we have to know that you start with glucose, skip down to the end after those enzymatic reactions, and your final product is going to be your 2 pyruvic acids. But now that whole process didn't need oxygen, so no oxygen was necessary. And you also yielded a net of 2 ATPs per glucose molecule. So glycolysis, taking glucose, go through a whole bunch of steps. We don't need to know every piece of it, just know enzymatic reactions. And we get down to making the end products, the 2 pyruvic acids. Now those two pyruvic acids are going to be converted then before they reach the next step into acetyl-CoA. Pretty much what happens is you take out a carbon and you have acetyl-CoA. That end product, that acetyl-CoA, is what will be taken and sent into the second phase we'll get to in a second. But now that's glucose. If you're looking at the other components, so lipids and amino acids, if you're trying to break down lipids, you're looking at beta oxidation. In the case of beta oxidation, you're now in the mitochondria, so we're inside the organelle. Remember, glycolysis was out in the cytosol. So beta oxidation is inside the actual mitochondria. What happens is you'll remove 2 carbons from the molecules. So 2 carbons are pulled off the fatty acid chains. Then the result of that is you've created acetyl-CoA. So it's not quite the same process because we started with fatty acids, lipids, but we're taking off 2 carbons and resulting in acetyl-CoA, the same thing that goes into phase 2 or step 2. If it's a case of amino acids, then that's just going to simply be amino acid catabolism. What happens here is you remove a nitrogen. Once that nitrogen is removed, then the carbon skeleton left over for the amino acids can be converted right into acetyl-CoA. Or depending on which amino acids were present, you might remove the nitrogens and then build one of the intermediaries inside of the citric acid cycle, which is phase 2. So it doesn't matter if it's glucose, if it's lipids, triglycerides, or if it's amino acids, proteins. All 3 can be used in catabolism. And they're all sent into the second cycle, which is the citric acid cycle. Now we hope to use mostly glucose, because glucose is the more efficient energy storage, and plus our fatty acids and our amino acids, we need them for cell functionality and structural components as well. All right, step 2 of catabolism. So we went through the first one, glycolysis, beta oxidation, or amino acids, and their catabolism. But step 2 is going to be the citric acid cycle. In the case of the citric acid cycle, we can take from the glucose, amino acids, or the fatty acids. Doesn't matter if it was glycolysis, if it was beta oxidation, or amino acid catabolism. All three feed into the citric acid cycle. Now, the citric acid cycle is also known as the Krebs cycle, but they have other names as well, so either one's fine. But we're taking that acetyl-CoA, we're going to break the bonds, strip off the carbons, strip off the electrons, resulting in 2 net ATP per acetyl-CoA. Those electrons, they're being transferred. You're going to have the NAD positive or NAD plus molecule goes to NADH. The FAD molecule goes to FADH2. So we've transferred the electrons now. That's important because those two molecules, FADH2 and NADH, are going to go into the third phase, the electron transport chain. So we're going to, again, have that third phase coming up, but right now, citric acid cycle, taking out the carbons, breaking the bonds, transferring the electrons, and resulting in 2 net ATP. All right, third phase. In the third phase, the electron transport chain. This one also is happening inside the mitochondria. What we're doing now is we're taking that FADH2 as well as the NADH molecules that have the electrons being transferred, and they'll go through a series of processes, going through oxidations, which result in a net of 30 to 32 ATP molecules. Now, there's the range because it depends on how efficient each step ends up being. Because by going through the process of oxidation, we're basically burning the molecules in essence. We're going to give off carbon dioxide, give off water, and give off heat. The key thing here is that heat, because we need to slow down the process a little bit. By slowing it down, it allows less heat to be produced and more of the energy to go into ATP. So this step utilizes oxygen. We have to have oxygen here. And that's allowing for a much more efficient production of ATP molecules. That heat, though, is still important because that's a large percentage of our body heat is what's been produced by this electron transport chain. So we've gone through 3 different steps of catabolism now. Starting with, in the case of glucose, glycolysis, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain. All right, so now that whole entire process was meant to produce ATP, all based on the food and the nutrients we ate, all that energy we ingested. But let's shift gears into anabolism, or the anabolic pathways. In the case of anabolism, what we're trying to do now is we're trying to build. But the building can either be structural, components of the cell, your tissues, or storage units. We're trying to build DNA, RNA. Our entire cells and tissues and organs are all coming from anabolism. If you're trying to store glucose into glycogen, anabolism. Now, if you're doing that though, every glucose molecule you add on requires 1 ATP. So if you have a string of 50 glucose molecules making up that glycogen, that was 49 ATPs utilized. You're saying, hold on, 49, 50? The first one was there, didn't need to use energy. The second one, when you added on, was the first energy. So it's definitely energy intensive to store glucose. But then you eventually reach your limits. You can only store so much glucose in your liver and in your muscles. In the case of your muscles, the muscles will simply just use up all that glycogen when they start working again. The liver, it can release it into the bloodstream and use elsewhere. But once you have matched and reached the maximum amount of glycogen, then you end up with putting it into adipose tissue, fat storage. Now, adipose tissue is a more efficient way of storing energy. It's more efficient because it's more compact. You don't store water in adipose. When you store glycogen, water is stored with it. So really, fat is a more efficient way, a more compact way of storing energy. But with that being said, obviously having too much fat isn't a good thing. So there's that fine line of constantly building and building the excess energy until now you have too much excess energy and it's starting to cause health problems and other issues by having excessive amounts on your body. So anabolism, building up structures, either structure of the cell or energy storage units. That's basically metabolism, catabolic and anabolic pathways for functionality of your metabolic processes. Nutrition powers it all. Until the next video.